In October 2023, a video clip re-emerged across news outlets in Australia, showing startling footage filmed in North Queensland. The clip depicts workers discovering a boar that had been gruesomely torn in half, with the only clue as to what might have caused it being a set of large footprints nearby. One worker compared his boot to the footprint, revealing how his own was dwarfed in size. The tracks appeared to lead up a hill into the wilderness. Some researchers speculated that this could be evidence of the elusive Yowie.
The Yowie is also known as the Yehu, the Yuri, the Hairy Man, or the Yahoo. It's a fanged humanoid bipedal marsupial or great ape featured in Aboriginal mythology. It also has a lot of other names, and the word Yowie came from Yowie in the language Gamilaraay or Larai from southeastern Australia. So there are plenty more terms for it. It is said to stand 2 to 3 meters tall, covered in dark hair. Some Yowie researchers say there are 3 distinct species. And I also saw that its feet are on backwards, legends say, which explains why they're so hard to track, because you see a track leading up somewhere, but it's actually that's where it came from. Other stories say that they are a sort of ancestral figure from the Dreamtime that were the original inhabitants of the country. And I thought this was really interesting because of how the Aboriginal oral histories and legends are so ancient and depict a lot of like good zoological information. This indicates to me the possibility of encounters with another humanoid species right at the beginning of human expansion around the world, when there were other humanoid species we lived with.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
was just going to say, so these stories could be like remnants of a time when humans were living with other bipedal human type species, and they've carried on this like story from then until now.
Right. I've read on the Cryptid wiki, so I don't know how accurate this is, but that the Yowie is described as being the more aggressive version of a Sasquatch and has been reported ripping off the heads of kangaroos and dogs, and apparently ripping boars in half. In terms of recorded sightings, it seems like the earliest ones come from 1788 and continue up until recent times, with sightings continuing into the early 2020s. There are Yowie research websites with reports of sightings and where they happen. So the highest number of sightings is in New South Wales, followed by Queensland, and then Victoria in that order. They take up like the vast majority of sightings. In the 1850s, there were accounts and writings of what were called indigenous apes in Australian Town and Country Journal, or sometimes it was referred to as the Yahoo Devil or Hairy Man of the Woods. In 1912, there was another outbreak of, quote, ape sightings, and an amateur naturalist, Henry James McCooey, offered to catch one for the Australian Museum for £40. In terms of, so there have been many sightings. In terms of evidence, probably the most famous video of a Yowie comes from the year 2000 when a man named Steve Piper caught a sighting on tape in the Brindabella Mountains in what's now referred to as the Piper footage. You can also watch the Piper footage online on the Cryptid Archive, which is the channel run by Truth, Scarier Than Fiction. Any thoughts on the Piper footage?
I do have thoughts on the Piper footage. I watched it, and I must say, I was disappointed. It was very blurry and obscured. It looks like it's just a guy. As soon as it looks like you're going to get a good look because he's coming out from the trees and the camera's getting closer, the video ends. How convenient.
A lot of cryptid videos end just before the cryptid gets out of the clearing.
Why did the video end just then? Were they using a film camera and they ran out of film? It just doesn't make any sense. Were they filming it and then someone They passed out right then? Like, why?
Well, if it's the year 2000 and I think it was just a camcorder on tape. I don't think it was a film camera. Can I say, just as an aside, like most hairy or bipedal hairy ape videos are like that. And if you watch a load of them for ages and then you go back to the Patterson Gimlin film, you're like, wow, if this was a costume, they put a lot more effort in than most people.
Blatant Bigfoot propaganda here in the middle of our Yowie discussion.
What? How is the Bigfoot propaganda? What are you talking about?
I know you love that video, but we must move on.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Can't you admit though? Compare it to the Piper footage in the year 2000. That
Yeah, it's way better. Like the Bigfoot footage is way better than this.
no.
So
Uh,
we thought we would do something fun. We thought we would interview. We know a few Australians, some Aussies, so we thought we would interview them and see what they thought. We wanted to know like how prevalent is the Yowie in people's minds who actually live in Australia? How famous is it there? And is it affected by where they're from? So we have some interview clips.
okay, and we're going to play those recordings now.
Great.
How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for doing this call.
Yeah, for sure.
So I just have 3 questions for you. Have you ever heard of the Yowie?
The Yowie
Yeah.
is like a creature.
Yeah, it is.
I think I have actually. I think it's so in my head. I'm imagining some kind of like big snowman kind of thing, but I don't know why. But I think I have heard of a Yowie. Yeah.
Okay, so have you heard anything else about it?
No. I think the only associations I have in my head are that it's a sort of like a Yeti kind of large-looking creature. That's about that all. But yeah, I think I might have heard of it.
Yeah, okay. That's basically, it's like the Bigfoot of Australia.
Yeah.
Do you think it could be real?
Probably not. I think my bias would be to say no, but I don't have any. That's not a very strong opinion.
Okay. Well, that's all I have. Thank you. It's going to be
Okay.
in my podcast.
No worries.
All right.
I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
My first question is, have you ever heard of the Yowie?
Yes. I don't remember what it is exactly. It's something along the lines of like an Australian equivalent of Bigfoot. So it was like a kind of a big creature that, that some people would, claim to see. The only reason why I know of it is because when we were kids, they used to have a little chocolate treat, kind of like a Kinder Surprise, but it was in the shape of a kind of like a monster, and that was called a Yowie.
Okay, cool. Do you think it could be real?
Possibly, maybe it was real, but I don't think so. As in, like, I don't think it is alive today.
Okay. Is there anything else you've heard about it?
Not really. Just trying to think what else no. Not
Okay.
really. Other than, it's from like Aboriginal, kind of Indigenous Australian kind of stories.
So, my first question, have you ever heard of the Yowie?
I actually haven't heard of the Yowie except out of the concept of like the chocolate ice cream.
Right. So, there's an ice cream that is called the Yowie, but it's not related to the sort of Bigfoot creature.
Yeah, I had never like really put those two and two together. Because on the packaging, I had a look the other day. On the packaging, they're still quite popular here, especially in the summer. It's got this little like, now that I think about it, it is kind of like Bigfoot looking guy on the packaging. But in my brain, I always just thought like weirdly it was just like an ice cream with legs, like a hairy ice cream with legs. But outside of that, I haven't really heard about like it very much.
Okay. So you haven't heard anything about the Yowie ever, like a sort of ape man running around Australia?
No, I think I guess my impression is that like the Bigfoot or Yeti would probably like hide out in the big trees, like in the woods, or like maybe in the mountains. But because Australia is so big and like Western Australia has the majority of like the desert, um, and all the mountain ranges and all like the big tall trees and stuff, that's kind of over east. So if I was thinking about like my believability, I don't really know where this like big how big is it meant to be, like 8 foot creature is meant to hide. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, but I think like, in terms of like superstitions, in Western Australia at least, we don't really have a whole lot of like don't go out into the woods. It's more like we have a lot of superstitions from like um the indigenous tribes that are over here, the Noongar people, the Noongar country. Um yeah, so not really a lot of like Bigfoot, Yeti kind of vibe.
Hmm. Okay. So do you think it could be real?
Look, I think I don't know everything in the in the whole vastness of the world, but I haven't seen any evidence for it, at least for me in my area. But once again, it's really difficult to imagine because when you go out into like the regional part or the rural part of Western Australia, all the trees kind of go away. There's a few like sparse trees here and there, but it's mainly like shrubbery that's basically up to your hip. Um, so like if there was this big creature, you'd be able to see. And we also just don't
Mm-hmm.
really have that many like big native like mammals that like theoretically this thing could like feed on.
Right. Okay. Thank
Maybe they're
you.
vegetarian though, you know? We have lots of plants, lots of berries. They might just be vegetarian.
Yeah, they could be. So, thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, so have you ever heard of the Yowie?
Yowie. It's in Australia anyway. It's actually a little chocolate. Like, do you know Kinder Surprises?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they actually used to sell pretty much just like a Kinder Surprise, but they're called a Yowie. They have little monster design on them and stuff like that. But that's pretty much the extent of at least like Tasmanian cultural exposure to them. I don't think there's a lot of people that know much about them.
Okay. So you've never heard of it as like a real creature or anything?
Only maybe through like the odd off the cuff sort of reference. But I've always associated it with just the chocolate brand, like the little chocolate thing from being a kid.
Okay.
Certainly wouldn't think of it as being too scary.
Right. Well, then just my last question is like, do you think there's any chance of it being a real animal? Or not really?
Having knowing nothing about it, honestly, I can't say, but I don't. I feel like it would be much more like a thylacine if it was maybe a real animal, where you would have a lot more occurrences of people reporting seeing it. There's a lot of footage, for instance, for the thylacine, but at the same time, it could be one of those cultural ones as well. For instance, there used to be a lot of megafauna in Australia that no longer exists, so that could have been something that was passed down as like a cultural memory from pre ice age times or something like that amongst indigenous cultures, because they were all oral history. So I could see how maybe there could have been like an ancient mammal, particularly a large one. I don't know much about the Yowie that you're talking about. Is it like predatory or anything?
Possibly. I've just heard of it described as Australia's Bigfoot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Look, maybe like you might it depends on the context as well, because if it's like an outback creature, then talking to people from like regional Western Australia, Northern Territory is quite regional all over, but like, regional Northern Territory, regional Queensland, those sorts of places still have quite, how do you say it, quite a connection to a lot of the Aboriginal cultures around there, because that's predominantly where a lot of the pockets of remaining Aboriginal culture tends to be. Not a lot of, let's just say, European heritage has sort of made its way out into the middle of the desert.
Okay.
And people have a tendency to kind of want to maintain their way of living. So you might find that out there would be a lot more knowledge about it, particularly if it's informed culturally. But yeah, unfortunately, not really heard of it beyond the chocolate.
All right. No worries.
All right. So we just listened to all the recordings that the both of us collected from our Australian friends. And basically, the reason I wanted to do this was I wanted to see if it was in the consciousness of normal, everyday Australians who aren't interested in cryptids. Because in America, I feel like Bigfoot is in the public consciousness.
Right.
Like, everyone knows who Bigfoot is.
It's
But
also, being in America as an outsider, it's like this icon. Like, so many shops and everything have Bigfoot coasters or Bigfoot
mhm.
signs or little Bigfoot trinkets you can buy.
Yeah, so listening to these reactions, it doesn't seem like the Yowie is like that, right?
No, it's even when they have heard of it, which a few of them have, they haven't really heard much about it at all.
Yeah, like, it's just a little chocolate sweet.
Yeah, I have a story about the Yowie chocolate.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know how I got my hands on it. Either it came to whatever country I'm in Europe, or someone brought it back from Australia. But at some point, I actually did get one, because I remember specifically because it has the toys are always animals. So I got a
Uh-huh.
toy wallaby. And that was the first time I've ever heard of a wallaby. And we were doing
Wow.
in the school that I went to, we were doing Noah's Ark, and the teacher said everyone got to choose an animal to put on the
Mhm.
ark, and I said I wanted to do a wallaby. It's like, oh no, sorry, it has to be a real animal.
You should have said you wanted to do a Yowie.
Yeah, that's my
That's
story.
bad. Yeah, it's interesting that, like, it has animals in it, but it's called the Yowie. So it's like Yowie just means animal fun. Like, it doesn't mean the Yowie in that context.
Well, I think the chocolate it was in the shape of like a monster.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's like, I don't know. Maybe it was the animals it ate.
Maybe. Um, let's see. So lots of people mentioned the chocolate. And then when we asked, like, if they thought it was real, mostly they said probably not real, possibly real, haven't seen any evidence, hard to imagine, as far as the west of Australia, which does explain why more sightings could be in the east, the forests. Like,
Hmm.
Max's, should I say his name?
I think we can say that. Well, I checked with everyone for the first name. You can message him
Oh,
afterwards. I think first names are
okay.
okay though.
Anyway, Max's observation that they would be in the east where the forests are, that matches our like sightings data, and he didn't even
Yeah.
know that. So I thought that was interesting. And another thing I thought was interesting was that both Peter and Michael said maybe it was real, and Michael specifically said maybe it's a cultural memory passed down, which is what I said already.
Yeah.
So,
So there are a few dots starting to come together.
mm-hmm. And he also said it would be more like the thylacine if it was real, more sightings, which is sort of what I was saying before, like that it's possible it's just a cultural memory that's been passed down and that people aren't actually seeing it now. And if they are, they're like cryptid freaks.
Well, I don't know if you should say that,
Obsessed with
but
cryptids is what
I
I
don't know
mean.
if you should say that either. Because
Okay, I'm
there,
sorry.
I mean, you have to search them out, but there are a few notable sightings. Like there was some politician who claimed to have seen one.
Hmm.
If that's notable
All
to
right.
anyone, maybe it isn't. But yeah, it is a good point though, because like probably every few months, if you like follow cryptozoology stuff, there's something about a thylacine. There's even in this episode, but like a few months before that, there was like this puppet that everyone thought might be real that caused a big controversy. And there's always a few years ago, there was like all this controversy about pictures that someone wasn't going to release, and then they released them, and then it looked like a cat.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't really hear that much with the Yowie, even if you follow Cryptid.
Yeah. Have you? So you did say you listened to the Yowie episode of the Cryptid Factor, right?
Yeah, but a few years ago.
Right, and I listened to it recently, but I can't even remember what they talked about. If like whatever it was wasn't very compelling, like they didn't have a lot of evidence that they brought up. So
Yeah, I think they only went over like one sighting, and I think they just recounted it. Yeah.
fascinating.
Thank you to all our Australian friends for contributing.
Yes, and I'm glad that they all sort of agreed. Made it easier to analyze.
The Yowie doesn't seem like a popular thing, that popular in Australia, unless you're referring to the chocolate Kinder Surprise or the chocolate ice cream.
I'd like to try it.
I really liked the Yowie chocolate with the animals inside. I was so excited to get more animals.
That's really sad. You should have moved to Australia. And you should have gotten a teacher who knew what wallabies were.
Yeah, I had to make an elephant in the end.
That's so sad. You should have just done it. I would have just made the wallaby.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, this is just like a similar thing happened to me in elementary school where we all had to pick a country, and I picked South Africa, and my teacher was like, I said a country. And I said, yeah, South Africa's a country. She's like, no, that's a region. Pick a country. It's like, I was just reading about South Africa earlier today. I know it's a country. Stop trying to gaslight me, teacher.
That's a lot more surprising, I feel like, because wouldn't that, like, your teacher have been, I mean, South Africa would have been on, like, the political stage for, while she was growing up, I imagine.
Well, she thinks it's real, but she thinks it's a region. Like when people say sub-Saharan Africa or something, she thought it was like, I guess she thought apartheid was happening in Southern Africa instead of South Africa.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all have blind spots, I suppose.
Not me. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so. And remember, I told you a child was talking to me about the frilled shark.
Yeah.
A child I was teaching, and I was like, what is that? I don't know what that is. I didn't tell them that they were stupid or that they didn't know what they were talking about, but I didn't know what it was. So that was sort of embarrassing. And I looked
That's
it
not
up,
so
but
bad,
then,
though.
well, I felt like bad because I remembered when people told me South Africa wasn't real. And I saw him the next time, and I was like, oh, I looked up the frilled shark. It's really awesome. And he was happy.
Yeah, that's cool. But, like, not knowing something I think is fine. And then, like what you did, just, like, looking for it afterwards. If we ever go to Australia on the trip, let's eat Yowie every day and collect as many animals as we can.
Let's only eat Yowie every day.
Yeah.
This just in, two stupid podcasters from abroad collapsed from malnutrition while on a whirlwind tour of Australia because they only ate Yowie bars.
Thought they knew everything.
Yeah. They thought wallabies were real.
To be fair, no one
Drop
else
bears.
knew. Oh yeah, drop bears.
Drop bears are realer than wallabies, that's for sure.
You know, the thing about drop bears is that this is why cryptozoology can be so interesting, is that sometimes things, when they travel abroad, they go through filters or things get lost in translation. I did listen to like multiple podcasts that were dead serious about the cryptid of the drop bear, and people like went to Australia looking for it and hired planes to go to remote regions that didn't have any roads to try and find drop bears. And
That's
then
so crazy to me.
And then we were sitting in Japan one time, and I heard someone go, "Oh, did you hear drop bears in Australia?" I was like, "Wait, really?" And then all their faces lit up.
It's funny because like I never once thought it was real. I knew it was like a joke that Australians were having with foreigners. And they always think that they fooled me, but I'm just like, haha, I know what you're doing, sort of thing.
And then another thing was a cryptid that was in our vote, like our little vote poll, but we never actually got selected, was like the hoop snake.
Mm.
Do you remember that? And when I first was like talking to Peter, I was like, oh, I think I said something like cryptids or something, and it was or hidden animals. And he was like, the only ones I've really heard of were the joke ones, like the hoop snake and the drop bear.
So the hoop snake's a joke too?
I think so. I think this is
Uh-oh.
happening more frequently than people realize.
Uh-oh. What do you think else could be a joke? It's possible, like, something like some of the lake monsters are just a joke.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends. I mean, this isn't exactly a one-to-one, but in America, it seems for like a lot of people, Bigfoot is it just like a joke thing.
Yeah.
It's just like a funny character that we have.
But it has legitimate cultural history.
Yeah.
Didn't start as a joke.
Yeah, but do you ever think some of the things could have been legitimate at first and then morphed into something?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, just because some people think it's a joke now, it didn't start as
Yeah.
a joke.
Yeah. Maybe it's not a good example, but I'm just saying, like, or even in like where I live, the country that I live in, I was reading a cryptozoology book one day, and I was like, "Oh, and this part of this country is rife with these cryptid sightings. Never heard of it before in my life, but an intro into cryptozoology since I was a kid, and now you're telling me there's these cryptids wandering around that everyone's seen."
Right. So you haven't seen them? Ever?
No, I guess I'm the only one.
Guess so.
And we also got a recording from fellow YouTuber Calvin the Carnotaurus, and he had some interesting insights about the Yowie.
When it comes to Australian cryptozoology, I'm more of a Australian big cat specialist, with probably the only other cryptid I've really dived into in Australia being the Queensland tiger in any real extent. I do recall doing a bunyip video, but I basically remember nothing of the bunyip, so I don't really count that. But one of the things that I think might be worth noting as far as the Yowie is concerned is, I think it's the final chapter in the book Out of the Shadows by Tony Healy and Paul Cropper, simply titled A Glimpse into the Shadows. In there they went over what they dubbed the paranormal theory, where they talked of how there could be this more like ghostly apparition aspect to Australian cryptids as a explanation for why stuff such as the big cats in Australia have not been caught, because they stated in their book that they believe that these animals are too numerous and have been reported far too often to just not have any specimens caught yet. Should note that they only had 1,000 sightings. There's been some organisations that have collected upwards of 5,000 sightings of big cats in Australia. And that's just the big cats, that's not including thylacines, Queensland tigers, bunyip and yowie. However, one of the things that they noted was this weird trend that didn't just apply to Australia, but also to the rest of the world, in that they noticed that with the yowies in Australia, the number of sightings where you had these like hotspots of yowie sightings, they overlap very much so with hotspots for big cat sightings in Australia. As an example, Kangaroo Valley. Another trend that I remember, I think it was Tony Healy noted in an interview he did on the podcast Beastly Theories, was that a lot of the yowie sightings that him and Cropper had looked at occurred under power lines, which does bring up a sort of interesting aspect to yowie phenomena, I guess, because it does beg the question of could it be that they have some attraction to power lines, or perhaps maybe there's something like maybe some electrical radiation, or whatever you want to call it, coming from the power lines that causes the witnesses to actually see yowies. Also too, as I said, they didn't just point out of how the yowie hotspots overlap with big cats in Australia, they also point out of how you have the same thing in the UK with the British big cats and the British Bigfoot. And they also noticed the same with Sasquatch in North America and alien big cats there. I think they even said there was one, I think, Native American elder, I think it was, that they interviewed, correct me if I'm wrong, who said that his people believe that the Yowie is from another dimension. Well, not the Yowie, this was in North America, so you know what I mean. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. So, it is fairly interesting, especially for me, considering the fact that, well, as they point out, US, Canada, I think also, and Britain and Australia, well, that was all originally a part of the British Empire at some point, even though America did break off far earlier from the other two countries listed. So perhaps maybe it has something to do with European heritage, or perhaps simply it's just something weird with the human psyche and just general nature, because it's not only former British colonies that have had ape men reported. Anyway, that's about the extent of what I think I can say on the Yowie. Hopefully you and Mika Thomas very much enjoy my own personal insight as someone with very limited knowledge, and can't wait to see what your thoughts are on the Yowie. Anyway, have a good day.
Okay, so thank you very much to Calvin the Carnotaurus for all his insights. There's
Yeah,
a
that was a
few.
good. That was a good thought. Those were good thoughts.
Yeah, there's a few different points that were pretty interesting, actually. I guess the overlap with the big cats. I've heard before with Sasquatch that there's overlap with UFO sightings, but apparently now there's also overlap with big, mysterious big cat sightings. That was interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Not sure
it
why
does
that would be.
makes you think about, like, one explanation could be these are places that people go, that they like to go if they like drinking or doing drugs, you know, like places for spiritual contemplation, or places for just partying and being out of their mind, you know. Like, there, that could be one explanation, because I know there are some places where people are more likely to go if they just want to relax and, like, I don't know, take a psychedelic drug. However, you could think of it more as maybe these places have some sort of energy, but then you're getting into like spiritual explanations rather than biological.
Yeah, it's going a little bit too close to the edge for me, but I don't know. Maybe it's not something I can really comprehend or get on board with. I guess and maybe it is paranormal or extra dimensional or something like that. It could also be to be a little bit of a downer and a skeptic that the people that are going to these places in search of cryptids are probably more inclined to believe in more than one cryptid and more inclined to maybe mistake a variety of wildlife for different cryptids.
Yeah, that's sort of what I mean. I mean, I did say it could be linked to places where people like to drink, but it also could just be linked to places where people like to search for strange things.
Or maybe on a more positive note, maybe it's like these are environments that aren't as well explored, and that's why there are more mystery animals sighted there.
Right. Well, I will say there are environments that are harder to fully see. For example, Australia interior, I would say, is less explored in that it's less populated, but you could see for miles, you know, compared to in a jungle, it's easy to mistake things for other things.
Yeah. The power line thing was pretty interesting. Like seeing by power lines, that's an odd connection. Maybe it's something to do with the electrical currents or something. Or maybe if it is a real creature, though, I wonder if like an animal would use them to navigate as well.
I heard about that, so it's
The power
possible.
lines
I've heard about power lines being used to navigate for animals.
for known animals.
Yes, although I can't remember which animals we were discussing at that time.
Yeah, it wouldn't be surprised me that much. I feel like I've also heard of animals using roads as well to navigate.
Yes, monarch butterflies use roads because they have good habitat on the side.
Right. And I guess then another point was the thing about like the like former colonies. I think it's sort of a mashup though. Like it sort of feels to me like there are always around the world there are always like legends of but sometimes just sound like other people or like other other but different humans that are like maybe a little bit more spiritual or like a little bit more spirits or a little bit more like I don't know, different in some way.
Yeah, I don't really think it has anything to do with British colonialism because remember, this is also something that is in the Dreamtime stories of Aboriginal people. You could say that like European derived people are having sort of a misinterpretation of these stories, similar to how many people say they're misinterpreting the stories from Native America, Native North American people. But yeah, like it is sort of influenced by the wild man story from Europe, but I do think it's more human tendency rather than some innate thing from, British people to see a humanoid mysterious creature.
Yeah, I just sort of I kind of feel like maybe it's like there's a humanoid mysterious creature, but then like it sort of reminds me of the Yeti. Like when you look at ori- original writings on the Yeti, they're like these spiritual beings and guardians on a different realm and everything. And then the Daily Mail, the British tabloid newspaper, talks about like these as a flesh and blood ape Bigfoot creature in the mountains. And I feel like sometimes there's an inclination to take legends of different humanoid beings and kind of force them into a Sasquatch archetype.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying there's some misinterpretation of native legends and trying to say that it's an animal necessarily.
Yeah, because we didn't really get into that much with Bigfoot, but there's a pretty great video by Trey the Explainer where he went over like Bigfoot and Native American culture and how there's these books written all about it and how like here's a list of 100 different um, native examples of a Bigfoot, and he goes into it and he's like, okay, they described wild people in the woods who were maybe a little bigger or something, but also lived in homes, used tools, had language, had fire, had clothing. It's like this isn't really a Bigfoot. This is just these are just different people.
Yeah, it reminds me of that audiobook we listened to talking about the Alaskan, the guy who disappeared in Alaska, remember? And his idea was that there are these people out there, like the wild people who aren't contacted by Europeans and wished him harm or wish humanity harm, but they mostly stay to themselves in like wild Alaska. And they don't exactly have homes, they're more nomadic, but they have a society and use tools and all that. So that could be interpreted by someone who's used to thinking about Bigfoot as Bigfoot, even if it's just like this is a different tribe or this is a legend about the other sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if they like, I mean, you even see it today with like tribalism, but like if someone's your enemy, you add like different things. Like it seems like a common thing is if someone's your enemy, you call them giants. Like, especially if you defeated them in battle, it's like, well, they were way bigger than us, but we still were able to beat them all up.
Right. So I did collect some theories about what the Yowie could be. These are strictly zoological theories rather than the possible spiritual explanations. So one thing is it could be a large marsupial. There were large marsupials in Australia in the past, like larger than and different than a kangaroo. So one example is the Hulitherium, which was like a marsupial panda. And in some ways it looks sort of humanoid. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that was in the calendar you got me.
I
It almost
forgot I
looks like a
got you the
giant
calendar.
sloth.
Yeah,
Oh no,
exactly.
I can't find it now. Yeah, I think I vaguely remember. Yeah.
Another theory is it could be a primate rather than a marsupial, and this was a primate or great ape species that rafted to Australia during the same time or slightly before the Aboriginal Australians went to Australia. It could have even been an early humanoid that was able to build some kind of boat, although that seems less likely because we don't have really extensive evidence of tool use, like that kind of tool use, with any other humanoid species.
Yeah.
But it is possible to raft to Australia if the early Australian people were able to get there with their boats, then maybe some similar, like some humanoid type creature was able to get there with some kind of raft.
Maybe it's like the thing with the mammoths, like the Wrangel Island mammoths, where they like outlived all the other mammoths by thousands of years because they were on this secluded island. Maybe they were a group of humans, non-Homo sapiens, that lived on some secluded area that like to
Yeah,
use
exactly.
boats.
My third theory I thought was this is related to how Dreamtime stories include the Yowie. And if you don't know about the Dreamtime, it is almost a philosophy, a way of thinking, and a mythology from many different Aboriginal cultures that describes the ancestors and like beings that were there before humans were here. So I believe that this is actually strong anthropological evidence in many cases. And because of that, because they're prevalent in dream time, I think these could be memories from the move to Australia. So the people had to come from like mainland Asia, Africa ish. I mean, I'm not really sure exactly where they came from. I think it was like they came because no one knows the exact route, but it does seem that they were island hopping from in the region of Indonesia, and they possibly encountered orangutans, gibbons, or other humanoid species there. And this was noteworthy, and they told stories about it even after they got to Australia. So it's just a memory of their journey to Australia.
And then like an oral tradition maybe passed down for.
Yeah, because the oral
Yeah.
tradition of Aboriginal Australians is one of the best and most ancient in the world.
Yeah, I think I remember when I was looking up the mammoths, because I did a video about like claims of living mammoths from like different natives, and it seemed like a lot of it was like maybe oral tradition going back to when people actually did live with mammoths. And I remember like trying to look up the, what would you say, the earliest or the longest tradition of oral history, and I think it was said it was from like Australian or Aboriginal culture.
Yep, so those are all my theories. We didn't really debate, we just discussed.
I will say it always does like confuse me a little bit. I know anecdotes aren't like it's the lowest form of scientific evidence, some would say. But when you watch some documentaries about people who've like dedicated their life to like looking for the Yowie, and there's one guy say like, well, I had a life changing experience when the 600-pound gorilla creature was chasing me through the outback, and now he's dedicated his life to it. I'm like, okay, well, what did happen there? Like the
Yeah, I'd like to know as well. We should send our little Australian research team out to look into this more. All the people we interviewed today.
everyone we got a recording from.
Yeah,
Well, they were pretty spread out, and I think they have lives, but
no. Their new lives are to investigate this for us. Go out, start walking, and just don't stop until you see a
I know.
Yowie.
I bet there's a pretty cool like wildlife to find in interior Australia as well, though that hasn't been discovered yet.
Maybe. But they'll never know unless they start walking right now. Chop, chop.
Right. So, do you think the Yowie could be something that still exists today?
I am most inclined to believe my Dreamtime oral history theory in that it is just something that existed before, either on Australia or on the path to Australia, and I don't think it's around anymore, if I had to say.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. But I hope I'm wrong, and there's huge gorillas hanging around there.
Yeah, the world would be better with more gorillas, I suppose. Oh, that just reminded me of another thing I saw at the zoo. There was this gorilla, and he was walking around with something stuck to his foot, and we were all like, "Oh, what this guy? It's like so embarrassing, like someone walking with toilet paper on their leg." But actually, we saw him sort of move his foot so that the like fabric was on the ground, and then sit on it. He was carrying and moving a chair.
He was being clever.
Yeah. So anyway, that's sort of irrelevant, but great apes are cool.
Okay, well, let us know what you think of the Yowie. Thank you so much to everyone who did recordings for us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel for full episodes or download the MP3 from the links below.